have some guests here tonight who aren't from Point Loma. If you're not from Point Loma National University right now, maybe you've graduated in the past or you've visited before, but you're not a student right now, or a faculty or staff, raise your hand real quick. Special welcome. Look around. Special welcome to folks who are coming from off campus. Okay? We'll have some other folks trickle in and maybe even rush us here after we get started here. But my name is Jamie Gates. I'm a professor in the Department of Sociology and Social Work, and also direct the Center for Justice and Reconciliation. The Brewed Awakening Speaker Series is a program of the Center for Justice and Reconciliation. And I'm especially excited about tonight, the Friends of Friendship Park. I also sit on the steering committee of the Friends of Friendship Park, so we're speaking about things that are real dear to my heart tonight as well. But the Center for Justice and Reconciliation, its mission is to study poverty and oppression and to teach Christian means of social engagement. Many of you have been involved in some of the things we've done, like border tours. We run a summer program, like Urban Term, an urban immersion program, a South Africa Justice and Reconciliation study abroad. We also, though, and I brought some friends up here this evening just to introduce them to you. We also have internships in different issues and different social sort of hot buttons. And these are passionate people who have tremendous gifts. And it's my pleasure to work with them this semester in different internships. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves and tell you a little bit about the internships that they're working on.
Hi, my name is Haley Swan, and I'm a freshman here at Point Loma, and I've been aware of the issue of human trafficking in the world since I was about a sophomore in high school. How many of you are familiar with human trafficking? Okay, so a lot of you are. For those of you who don't know, there are approximately 27 million people in the world who are enslaved. And that's something that's just kind of crazy. We feel like, before I heard about the relevancy of this issue in the world today, I thought it was just something that was part of like the Civil War or like the Emancipation Proclamation took care of that. We don't have to worry about it anymore. There's a lot of like bad things to think about, and now we don't have to worry about slavery, yeah, but there's a sickening amount of it in the world. And like we believe that our God is a God who brings captives to those who brings freedom to the captives. Sorry about that. And a release from bondage and darkness for those who are blind and those who are enslaved. And Isaiah 61, this passage really captures like a beautiful restoration work that God has for the people of Israel and for just the people of the world. And we believe that extends to people who are victims of sex slavery, labor trafficking, so many different avenues. So our group is called Beauty for Ashes. We meet Wednesday nights at 6 in the cafeteria in a dining room. If you were walking to the cafeteria, you turned and then you walk down the ramp, and then you turn again. That's where we meet, Wednesdays at 6. And our desire is to pray and seek out what God's heart is and in this area and how we can act on it. We're doing a couple different things this semester. We're setting up a prayer night. We're going to do Time Out in March, and a couple different events to kind of get involved with and pursue like how do we respond to this great need in the world. So we'd love to have you, if you just want to come up to me, we're going to send around a list, write down your email, I'll put you on the list and kind of give you updates about it. But the group's Beauty for Ashes. We meet at 6 o'clock in the caf. So.
Hi, my name is Marissa Herzl, and I am the Jubilee Sabbath Economics intern with Jamie. I just started, and we're working on like a lot of fun stuff and getting a group together. Just dealing with a lot with things locally and internationally. Just being like a wise, conscious person of things that we're all dealing with all the time. We all buy clothes or everything. We buy everything. So.
Remind them the Roots of Giving Fair.
Yeah, the Roots of Giving Fair in the fall is our one of our really big things on campus that we invite the community to. We need lots of help with doing all different kinds of things. I know like some of you guys participated in it or joined us last year. So working on things like that and talks and everything. So if you want to talk more with me about it after, that'd be super awesome. And I can tell you all some more stuff because there's lots to know.
Hello, my name is David McKippen. I've also just started interning. Welcome the Stranger. It's about immigration issues, and we're in San Diego, close to the border. And of course, there's not just immigration dealing with Mexico and Central America, but internationally, well, non-Western hemisphere as well, refugees, stuff like that. And that's kind of what the Welcome the Stranger is about. And for this semester, we still got some things that we have to organize. But if you're interested, please, on the email list, we'll have name, email, and just, put exactly what you're interested in. Immigration. I mean, of course, if you're in multiple things, yeah, all the above. Just feel free, and we'll send out emails and let you know what exactly we have planned.
Thank you, all three of you. Thank you so much for your work, for your leadership here. So, I'm going to invite some friends of mine to come to the forum. We're going to play a brief video to introduce. How many of you have ever been down to Borderfield State Park? I know there's a number of us in this room who have been down to Borderfield. How many have no clue where Borderfield State Park is in the world? Oh, good. So we have a bunch of new recruits here to go down to Borderfield State Park sometime soon. So will my friends from the Friends of from Friendship Park come on up here and just take up some of these seats up here. And I'm going to go ahead and start a video that we produced. Kaylee Hernsberger, wave at everybody here. Kaylee and I produced this introduction video to what we're all about tonight. I could just have some help from friends at the back to bring in the posters that are out on the easels and just set them up on either side of us, two of each. If I can invite my friends here to come on up and join in the middle three seats here, John, Jim, Jill. All J's today, Jamie, John, Jim, and Jill. All right. I'm not getting the mic to work here. Maybe who's real tech savvy, you can help us get a mic to work on. David, do you have an extra battery for this? All right, so we'll go without the mic for a sec, if that's all right. Friends of Friendship Park is about, 2 years old at most, 2.5 years.
I would say June 1st, 2008 is sort of our birthday.
Absolutely. Let me just quickly introduce the friends who are here tonight. John Roshensky is a landscape architect, and he's going to tell you a whole lot more about what that means, or maybe at least a little bit. Has tremendous technical knowledge of what's happening down at the border and with the construction and with some of the contractors that are working. And he's been a real gift to our group in thinking through the complexities and the politics and the logistics of what's happening down where the border meets the ocean. Jill Holzland is a professor over at SDSU. She's a border blogger and writer. She's a gifted writer who has been cataloging things that are happening down on the border for quite some time now. She's going to tell you a little bit more about that. And Jim Brown is a new friend of ours who has been really passionate. He's one of the gifted architects in town. PC Digital, did I say that right? Is the public architecture. I'm sorry, it's public. I'm thinking about your email address. Right, public architecture. His firm has really cool write-ups. What is the magazine that you're written up in right now for the house?
Well, there's an article about one of our houses in San Diego Home Garden.
San Diego Home and Garden, right? Okay, and so Jim has been very creative in producing an alternative, friendly space that has a professional architect's mind and gifts and detail attached to it. So it helps to make what we're proposing through Friendship Park, through the Friends of Friendship Park, technically savvy and beautiful. So what I'd like to do, I'd like to start with Jill. And Jill, this is as much about helping everybody understand what Friendship Park means, sort of a little bit of its history. Jill's just written a great article on the history of Friendship Park. But as much as you share your expertise in this, we'd love to hear about who you are and how you came to this whole story.
Perfect. Yeah, I can start with that. I think I'll be okay without the microphone. I don't know. Or
Just for some folks
Are
in
you
the
want me
back,
to
if you
have
don't
a
mind.
mic? Okay, no, that's no problem.
Oh, it's,
And we're taping it as well, so you can tell us.
oh, terrific. Okay, yeah, no, I'll be a good girl and speak into the mic.
Let me start by saying I've lived in San Diego for 20 years. And for the first 18 years of my life in San Diego, I had exactly 2 experiences with Friendship Park. One was reading about the Tijuana estuary in Jerry Shadd's book, Hiking, A Foot in the Field in San Diego County, which is a terrific book for hikers, lots of ideas about where to go hiking. And, I would look through that book and I'd think, wow, this seems like such an interesting place, but it must be in Tijuana. So, I don't know, it sounds too complicated. So never went there. Never even looked on the map, never even thought about where it was located. It's obviously not in Tijuana, it's on the border. My other experience was in Tijuana. I went to a demonstration in 2001 against the FTAA, the Free Trade Association of the Americas. It was planned to be an extension of NAFTA that was going to extend down into Latin America. And there was this huge demonstration in Tijuana, and we went to Playa de Tijuana afterwards in the evening, and I looked across the fence and realized that there was some kind of a park there, but had no idea what it was. And that was Friendship Park. But for 20 years, I lived in San Diego completely ignorant of where's Borderfield State Park, where's the border, where's Friendship Park. I didn't know anything about these things until 2008. And so, like a lot of you, you can live in San Diego and not even realize that there's really a border here. The official story of San Diego that you get in the news tends to be about palm trees and Mission Valley and going shopping, and there's a sale in Fashion Valley, and there's a Macy's one-day sale, and that's the story you hear, and that's what you hear a lot about. You hear a lot about La Jolla. I went to UCSD for my PhD, and so that pulled me further north and further away from the border, yet again for another 10 years of that time that I lived in San Diego. And so my relationship with Friendship Park started very recently. In 2008, I started working on the grant-making committee for the Foundation for Change, which is a nonprofit foundation that works with grassroots communities in the immigrant and border communities of San Diego. And an entire world opened up to me that I had no idea that even existed in San Diego. I'd always had a kind of connection to social justice all of my life. I've always been a political activist. I was very active in my son's school. We worked to save music programs in San Diego Unified School District, so I was always politically active. But I could never figure out how to connect that in San Diego until I started working for the foundation. And in the process of working there, I learned about these border communities, and then I learned about Friendship Park. And we took a trip down to the border. John Fanistil took us down to the border, and he'd gone on a border tour with Dan Watman, who is one of our core members of Friendship Park. And we walked down to the border, and John started to explain to us how they were going to build the border wall. And we were standing overlooking a canyon, and the canyon is 180 feet deep, and it's a quarter mile wide and a half mile long. And John told us that the Department of Homeland Security was going to fill that entire canyon full of rock and soil and build a road over the top. And I just thought, oh, come on, that's ridiculous. They're never going to do that. And then I slowly started to realize, if they're going to do that, somebody's got to pay attention to what's going on here. And so I thought, this is a really important project for me. And I started getting involved as a photographer and as a writer, and started going on border tours with our friend Dan Watman, and literally hiking along the border and taking photographs. And throughout the summer of 2008, we went down probably once a week. We went down and just kind of hiked around, and often we'd go on the Tijuana side and overlook the border, and we photographed and did research on the construction. And we literally saw them fill in the canyon of Smuggler's Gulch. There's now a 145-foot berm built of soil that they filled in that canyon with. And it was 2.2 million cubic yards of dirt, which is, I can't even get my mind around what that even means. It's just so much. But it was really frightening to watch it happen and to realize there's no one really paying attention to what's going on. In San Diego, we alerted the media, and the media kept telling us that it really wasn't a story because the decision was made a long time ago, and so it's not really a story now. And we sort of shook our heads and thought, how can this not be a story when there's this massive construction project going on and no one's paying attention? And so that gave me even more impetus to pay attention, to do some blogging, and I started a blog, started researching it, and got involved in a national coalition called No Border Wall. And this was a group that started in Texas. The original name was No Texas Border Wall. And it started in Brownsville with a group of activists there who were in the same position we were in. They were getting no answers from the federal government, and even the local political leaders in Texas could not get answers from the federal government about what was going to happen in their own town and in their own congressional districts. And so I started working closely with them, started participating in weekly conference calls, and learned a lot from them about what was going on in other places and what were the similarities between what was going on in Texas, what was going on in Arizona, and what was going on in San Diego. And it gave me a lot of ideas for, avenues to research, ways to approach it, and just expanded the story tremendously. And so that's how I got involved in all of this. And then in 2008, John Fanistil started leading groups out at Friendship Park and having weekly communion services in the park. And that was yet another way to really begin to engage in the actual space of the park. Beyond simply being an advocate for justice in the abstract, this became a real experience that was meaningful to me. I went to the park every week. I was there. I began to love the place. I began to have an emotional connection to the place itself, and began to make friends as I was there at the park, began to engage with people in conversation who were from Mexico on the other side, and really began to feel the specialness of this place. And so that sort of added a whole other dimension for me, where before I think I was more activated by the sense of being a sort of adventurous activist and trying to take down the federal government and trying to sort of uncover some kind of conspiracy. This was a much more genuine relationship to place that I was beginning to feel, and so that's sort of where I'm at now with it. It's become a place to me that's very special, and it's meaningful for a lot of reasons that Jim and John will talk about in a minute, but very special to the people who go there and who've spent time there. So anyway, I'll turn the mic over and.
Well, let me ask John. You've been involved and concerned about more than just the park in this area, more than just Friendship Park as a part of this. But tell us a little bit of how you came to join Friends of Friendship Park and concerned about this place.
Okay. Well, my background is I'm a geographer and a landscape architect, and what really struck me about this area was when I was younger, my family moved to San Diego, and the first place we lived in was Imperial Beach. And I remember going down and playing on the beach and wandering down the beach. And I think at first it didn't dawn on me that we were literally living right on the border. And eventually I came to understand this area and the significance of the fact that there was this artificial line that was right in front of me that somehow meant something, because it was telling me that it was, okay for me to be on this side, but what was on the other side, I had to be concerned about or something like that. And that's not the way that I had been brought up. I had lived through the civil rights movement in Mississippi during the 60s and had seen what that division meant to me and my community. And then to come to San Diego and see something similar, it just didn't stand right. And I think probably the reason why I studied geography and landscape architecture was just simply because I had this natural curiosity of why things were the way that they were. And the thing about landscape architecture that I always love about it is it's about place, about a sense of place. It's about creating spaces and places that people can relate to. And as Jill mentioned, it's something that literally becomes a part of you, and you really begin to understand what the relationships are of these places and how they tie to other places. And what really struck me about Friendship Park is, here was a place in probably one of the most important areas of the world as far as international relations go that was just being taken away. I mean, it was just, just through some indiscriminate decisions, it was just being taken away from the people that it was part of their life. And I said, if there's anything that I can do personally to get involved in trying to help bring this place back to the community, that's what I wanted to do. And I was fortunate in that I had the time to get very actively involved, and I've been very lucky and have met some incredible people that are involved in this effort. And as I was telling Jim on the way up here, I feel like I've come into the process on Friendship Park late, but that I just hope that anything at all that I can bring to it is worth the effort. And the only thing I can say is if there's any places out there anywhere for any of you that you feel that strongly about, it's never too late to get involved. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jamie.
Thank you. We'll come back to you in a minute about some of the details of what's happening. But let me ask Jim here. Jim, you lived in San Diego how long, and how did you come to this whole, connection, this work around Friendship Park?
I hadn't always lived in San Diego. I did a lot of traveling around, but I had a practice here for 20 years, and a good practice. I'm an architect, and that's a fun job. It's a very challenging job. I do a lot of different things. Do furniture, design houses, design student centers, do tons of good stuff. But, about the time Jill started working with John at the Foundation for Change, I applied for a mid-career fellowship at Harvard University called the Loeb Fellowship. It's a really unique fellowship where you are challenged to think about your community, your town. Think about what needs perhaps to be done at your town that's different, and something that you've never yourself worked on before. And go away for a year and work on that. And then when you come back to your city, they fully expect you to take more of a leadership role in the community. So it's a big challenge. It's a big honor and a big challenge. When I left, so I was there 2008, 2009, and I decided the thing that I didn't know anything about, even though I practiced architecture in the city for 20 years, I didn't know anything about the border region. I hadn't done anything to contribute to the great debate and work being done around border issues. And it's probably the most important thing that's being done in San Diego. So that's what I focused on. And it took the form of, I designed a binational park the year I was away, a big one. And at first I thought I would start with a binational city, but I had an acquaintance that I met in San Diego, and I met him just before I went away on my little fellowship. He had gone to Harvard, and this mutual friend said, "When do you call this guy?" It was Alan Burson. I called Alan Burson, and I told him I was going on this fellowship, and I was going to study binational parks in the border region. He was super helpful. invited me over, gave me all these books to read on the border, very passionate about the border. This was before he had his current job.
Tell them what that is.
He's the border czar. He's the guy in charge of the border between the U.S. and San Diego. And it's kind of strange that he has that job, because it really seems like, and what the job really is keeping people from coming across the border. What he's most passionate about, and it's probably a best kept secret, he's most passionate about making as many holes in the border as possible before he got his new job. So he knows a lot about that. We'll see how successful he's able to be, because he's kind of pigeonholed in his job. But he may end up helping us in our struggle with Friendship Park, because at the core of this beliefs is that perhaps we can make little pinpricks in the wall when we can. So anyway, he was telling me the story about a bridge that goes across the Rio Grande in Texas. And the story was that when Mexican citizens come into the U.S., they're well into the United States before they come to the checkpoint. And at the same time, when American citizens are going to Mexico over the same bridge, they're well into Mexico before they come to the checkpoint. So there's this moment when the people of both countries are together and they haven't gone through any crossings. They haven't checked in or out with anyone. I was shocked by this. I thought, are you kidding me? This exists? There's a precedent for this? I mean, it's almost like a legal precedent. So I was very excited about that idea and decided to design a binational park. And the site was the Friendship Park zone, and larger. It was much larger. It encompassed many acres on both sides, all the way down to the ocean. It encompassed the bull ring. I don't know how familiar you all are with what's down there, but the bull ring, many buildings down there on the Mexican side, on the U.S. side, and much of state park land, stopping at the estuary, the natural, but all of it built up.
At Harvard, you're given permission to think big, right?
Yeah, well, well, it's not that big, it's not that impossible to believe that this could happen. It's a great site for a binational park. I do believe it will happen there eventually. I think Friendship Park is really laying the groundwork for a much bigger project in the future, a true binational park. Maybe, I don't think we can have that now, obviously, but in the future we could. So when I got back to San Diego, the work that I did towards that park, I did it in a very artistic way. It wasn't like a lot of facts and figures and hardline drawings. It was sketches and very loose models and sketches that had nothing to do with the subject matter, seemingly. More intuitive study. That was displayed at the La Jolla Museum of Contemporary Art when I got back. And some of the Friendship Park. I think Catherine Keenan perhaps saw the show. You saw the show, and then I was asked to help the Friends of Friendship Park with their project, and I was very glad, very happy to do so. And it's a really dedicated group of people that I've been working with. They're not doing it for money or fame; they're just doing it because it needs to be done, because it's the right thing to do.
Thank you, Jay. I've just really quick, our own university has been involved with Friendship Park for about 10 years, interestingly. We started getting involved at Friendship Park with the La Posada Sin Fronteras. Anybody been to the La Posada Sin Fronteras? Do you know what I'm talking about? So every Christmas time, Christians gather on both sides of the border down at Friendship Park. And there's a service, and we commemorate those who have died crossing the border. We tell stories to one another. We sing some songs. We tell the story of Christmas itself. And we light luminarias with the names of those who have died on the border. And my own involvement at Friendship Park was grounded in that rhythmic Advent practice of going to La Posada Sin Fronteras all the way up until 2008, which was the last one we could have, where we actually came up. I mean, we do a few subversive things like share Mexican hot chocolate through the fence, or they pass tamales underneath the fence. And, that's international contraband, because it's illegal coming through the fence. But it wasn't anything that subversive. It was just we throw candy over the fence as well. We get some Mexican candy, and they get a couple Snickers bars going on. And it was a profoundly beautiful space. It's a profoundly meaningful space, and we would even call it, at one level, a holy space. particularly in those moments where this kind of interreligious events are going on. And other things have happened there, a lot of other things have happened there, like families that gather there on a regular basis, families split by their immigration status, and one part of the family is over on this side, another part of the family is over on that side, and this is the only place they can meet and see one another. So they had like pilgrimages, family would have pilgrimages to this space. Cross-border yoga classes were going on. And I'm not kidding you. Dan Watman, if he were here tonight, he'd tell you about the cross-border yoga classes. Dan Watman runs these events called border encuentros, or these encounters that people just meet up and start to talk about their lives. And it was also less formal than that as well. We're just Playas de Tijuana is on the south side. That's what they call the beaches, right on the south side of the fence. And a lot of families would be around there. All kind of funerals going on, like revival services going on that side of the fence. At one point, there was an artistic group that had people on both sides of this park and shot somebody on a cannon across. The person like flies through the air with their passport in their hand. And that's Friendship Park. It has all this life and a tremendous energy. In addition to the history, right? In addition to this being a significant historic site, there's the monument itself is called a monument. Mesa, the monument is the designated site for the first boundary marker here of the United States and Mexico. So let's fill everybody in a little bit about where Friendship Park is at this point and the process. We were just tonight over at in Imperial Beach at a meeting where the Border Patrol laid out its new design. And I think maybe some of y'all know the technicalities a little bit better. Maybe John, you could start filling in the picture a little bit more with like this particular moment. This is a very pregnant moment right now for all of this going on.
Well, like all federal projects, there's a process that the federal government goes through when they design and procure new facilities. And in this particular case, this is a long project, and this is essentially a very small piece of a very larger project. But they're going through the same process, and unfortunately, in the case of Friendship Park, is the majority of this work that the government's been doing has been completely in secrecy, where they haven't solicited any type of involvement from the community. They have made a concerted effort to try to hide as much of this work as they possibly could. And it was through the dedication of the Friends of Friendship Park that we pushed that issue and finally got them to come forward and admit that there was a much greater need for the community involvement. And we're very fortunate right now that we're at a point where partly the event that they put on tonight, I think, was a direct result of our pushing for more community involvement, and so they set this meeting up. The thing that we're going to have to stay really diligent on is to make sure that the input that we do put, that they do take that seriously. And part of that is going to be to really push for the design that Jim and others have developed, and to not accept what they tell us outright that they're going to do. That we do, as citizens of this country, have a say in what our government does, and it doesn't always turn out the way that we like. But if we don't stand up and push for the things that we really believe in as designers and planners and citizens, we're just not going to really have a say in the future of what happens.
Jim, could you explain the basics of the design that we're proposing?
I guess, let's see. I should start, yeah, let me refer to this. Let me refer to these two plans here. The basic condition as it is now is there's, can we go over the condition as it is now? Are you aware that there's a double fence yet? Okay, let me just give some quick background. So, 2.5 years ago, there was just one fence. There was just the fence on the border. And that, in the video you saw, where people could walk up to that fence and have picnics and hang out together and whatnot. 2 years ago, they built a second fence, just as tall, like a 18-foot tall fence, more than 100 feet away from the first one. And so, and said, now, and in between was just an area patrolled by the Border Patrol. So suddenly, you could not go up to the fence and have these really quiet, intimate moments, which is at the core of that experience. Being able to stand next to somebody, even through the border fence, had a lot of power. So much of the work that we've been doing all this time is simply to restore that simple idea of one person standing next to another person and being able to talk quietly. It's like a lot of work just to restore that. So what ended up happening was, with some pressure by the Friends, Border Patrol eventually had a band gate and allowed people to go through this kind of cattle experience, which I think you might remember from the video, where it's a super tight funnel, 5 feet wide, and then you can go into this really small gathering space. They could only let 25 people in at a time, and you couldn't approach the fence. It kept you 5 feet away from it. It added yet another 3-foot gate, so you couldn't approach the fence. What the things that we've been trying to establish are getting back to the fence where you can approach it simply, getting rid of all the bric-a-brac around you that makes you feel like you're in a detention cell. It's bad enough that you're between two 20-foot tall fences. We can't do anything about that. One of the challenges, and it's a huge challenge in the design, is that we have to design something that works within the military security apparatus and still make it a park, that people can feel somewhat like they're in an experience that maybe in the future will get better when there aren't so many fences. So the first thing we thought would be really important is to open up this outer gate. This is the border here. Open up this outer gate. So we installed a 60-foot rolling gate instead of just a 3-foot wide. And you see it at its fully open position here. So the Border Patrol can still control it in 20-foot increments according to their security needs at the time. This is something they insist on. They have to have what they call operational security. So we have to work within their rules. We have to be realistic. It's sometimes really hard. It's really painful, and you don't get everything you want. But we'd rather get something rather than nothing. We need to return this area as a place where people can meet. And it also becomes something else. It becomes a symbol too. It becomes a symbol for people to remember that this militarized fence area, and the constant reminders in the press about the murders and the violence in Tijuana and other border cities, despite all that, the best security that we can have in the long run is for the citizens of both countries to be friends. It's going to take a while to get there, but the citizens themselves, we can't lose hope in that, and we'll forget that. We're starting to already forget it. A lot of the citizens in Mexico are thinking we're turning their back on them, and they're probably right. And a lot of the citizens in the U.S. are getting hyper afraid and scared that the violence is it's going to hit you like instantly. If you were to go to Mexico, it's like a really dangerous and volatile city, which it is not. So we got to remember that, for the long term, that the best security that the Border Patrol can have, that our country can have, is that we're friends. Got sidetracked, sorry. Talk about the design some more. So the main aspects of the design. So instead of the really funnelized chute, we're proposing to them some really simple ideas. So you see these rows of little holes? Those are like little pegs in the ground, little post holes in the ground. That if you've been to, all of you I'm sure have been to state parks and national parks, they have little bollards just barely off the ground, and they have these really friendly looping ropes or chains between them. We're proposing they do that. And we'll respect those. We'll respect the placement of those bollards and those chains. We won't step over them. If we were to step over them, then maybe they would decide to do another security arrangement that's tougher. But we will respect that, so why can't they live with that? If there's some indications that they're going to accept that, we'll see. Some things that we're having, so the original design, it starts to slope down to the beach now, so we're trying to get access to the beach. And hip in the flat spot, there's places where people can kind of gather in group settings. And then as you go down the hill, there's these little flat areas that are more intimate for families, and that allow some privacy so they can have meetings. And because of handicap codes, we want handicapped people to be able to get down there too, so these are ramps. But they also form seat rolls. So at the top of each ramp, there's a little place to sit and look at the ocean. Another very important aspect of the design is right now, the main border fence is solid in this area. It's a corrugated solid fence. You can't see through it. So you can't look through it and see the ocean. And likewise, Mexican citizens can't stand here and see through it and see the ocean. We're going to ask that that be made open so you can see through it and have visual access to the ocean. Also, we're asking that we have access to the binational garden, which is a real thing. There's been plants planted on the U.S. and the Mexican side by Dan Waltman and others. We want access to that so people can get to it and water them. Believe it or not, there's a lot of them just sitting out there. And people on the Mexican side have to squirt water through the fence to keep the stuff alive. Those are we're not asking a lot. We're asking very small things, but it's so hard to work with the Border Patrol. Everything they see everything through the veil of security. How is that going to make, an agent's life, in peril or something? They have very active imaginations. So I guess that's the main part of the design. We've been working for a long time, for months and months and months, and it seems like nothing happens in all those endless meetings. They won't see, I'm an architect, so I'm so used to working with scheduling and budget. What's the budget? We can't tell you that. What's the schedule? We can't tell you. I mean, they actually will say, we can't tell you how much money there is. It's like, come on. It's quite bizarre.
Well, I want to, Jill, you just, so here, what has been sort of your, I don't want to say your frustrations, but what have been some of the challenges that you've seen us bumping up against in this process of trying to get a park to be more beautiful than what it is?
Okay, yeah, I can talk a little bit about that. I can go back to 2008, I think, and sort of talk about my experience being in the park. It's something that I began to document, and I began to sort of pay very close attention to it. We would go to the park, and this was 2008. So, let me just put this in the context of sort of the National Border Strategy Program. In 2006, Congress passed the Secure Fence Act, which mandated 700 miles of this double-layer border wall across the entire southwestern border of the United States. And so the reason we have this border wall over the top of Friendship Park is that it was an act that was passed by Congress. So this is not, we can't lay the blame on, the Democrats or the Republicans or any particular administration. Border walls have been around since the 70s. Jimmy Carter was pushing for, or under the Carter administration, there were many, many people pushing for walls on the border. And so after 2008, the federal government declared a strip of land, 53 acres of land in a narrow strip along the border. They declared it federal property. It was state property before that. And it's called condemnation. So they condemned it as though a house were being condemned. They condemned it and took it away from the state and declared it federal property. And so it was very ambiguous through the entire summer of 2008. It was very, very ambiguous what you could do there because it was still a park. And so we kept going to the park and people kept going to the park. And, there were these weird little fences. Like, there was this little plastic fence. And, and you sort of went, okay, is that a fence? I mean, you could walk right past it. You could walk right up to the border wall. And so we would go to the park. We would hang out at the park just like normal people did. But then sometimes we would go down to the beach and we'd hang out on those, those pipes down by the beach. Everyone, have you seen those photographs? It's where these big tall pipes go down into the ocean. That's the international boundary. And that's what the border wall looks like at that spot. But the pipes are huge, there are huge gaps in between the pipes, and you saw some of the photographs. People can walk right through them. Dan Watman is so funny. He volunteered as a lifeguard in Playas de Tijuana for the kids over there. And he would pick up his bike and shove it right through the fence and walk right through and just go and be a lifeguard. And the Border Patrol would get so mad at him. He's like, you know what? Nobody from Mexico is stopping me. And I'm crossing from the U.S. into Mexico. So what's your problem, right? And he would come back through the port of entry. He didn't try to get back into the U.S. through there. But it was very ambiguous. You didn't really know what was going on. And so we would go down, we'd go down to the beach, and we'd stand at the bars, and we'd chit-chat with people and talk to people, take photographs, hang out. People were going fishing. And sometimes a Border Patrol agent would come up, drive up in their truck, and they would say, "Excuse me, ma'am, could you please step away from the bars?" And I'd turn to him, and I would literally ask him, "So could you please tell me, is it against the law to stand up next to the fence? Like, what's the law? Please tell me what the law is." They wouldn't tell you what the law was. He just said, "Please, ma'am, please step at least 50 feet away from the bars." So I'd ask again. I'm like, "Well, is it illegal for me to stand next to the fence? Because I'm, hanging out and talking to somebody. If I stand 50 feet away, I can't have a conversation." And they would never answer the question. And I thought it was very interesting that they would never answer that question. And it happened over and over and over. And it happened to our friends over and over again. And I thought, this is a very interesting problem. The whole problem of jurisdiction is very interesting. Who has jurisdiction over this space? Because it used to be the state parks, and the beach down by the fence is under the jurisdiction of the sheriff in Imperial Beach, and then the park up at the top is sort of a state park, and so nobody really knew what was going on. And so it came to a head one day when Dan Watt was there he had a press conference going on with some environmentalists and some reporters on the Mexico side, and one of the reporters slipped his business card through the fence. And the Border Patrol agents just went crazy. And they drove up to him, and they ordered him to sit down on the ground and put his hands above his head, and he put his hands on top of his head. And meanwhile, his friends on the other side of the border were standing there astonished, and they were snapping photographs of the whole thing. And he was being detained. And he asked them, "Is it against the law for me to stand here next to the fence?" They wouldn't answer the question. They said, "Please step away from the fence." And he explained, "Listen, I'm having an event on Saturday. It's a binational event. It's sponsored by I Love a Clean San Diego. We're going to do a huge beach cleanup. There's going to be hundreds of people here, and we're having a press conference." They didn't listen. They had this massive banner on the other side of the fence, 10-foot banner. They were all wearing T-shirts. "This is a beach cleanup. We're going to do this thing." None of that registered with the Border Patrol. They were interested in the passage of the business card through the fence, and they said, "This is illegal to pass anything through the border fence. You can't pass anything that's unauthorized through the fence, regardless of what it is." Well, it was patently absurd. It was absolutely ridiculous. And so I decided, okay, I'm going to call the Border Patrol office and find out what's going on here. So I called the Border Patrol office and I said, "Listen, what's going on?" I asked them, "If it's illegal, arrest me. If what I'm doing is illegal, then arrest me right now." Well, we were not being arrested. So clearly, if it's illegal, they should arrest you. It wasn't illegal. So there was this ambiguity. And so I talked to the San Diego Sector Border Patrol, and it turned out it was really quite ambiguous. They really couldn't give me a straight answer about what the jurisdiction was, what was going on with it. And so they said, no, really, it's perfectly legal for people to meet up at the fence. We don't want to discourage people from going to the park. We don't want to discourage that kind of engagement. And I said, well, our experience has been the opposite. Every time we go there, we get harassed. And in fact, even much more ambiguous, sometimes when we go there, we don't get harassed. Sometimes when we go there and do exactly the same thing the next day, we do get harassed. And so it was very interesting, and we sort of went through the entire year of 2008, this sort of like weird ambiguity. And then in January of 2009, the San Diego Sector Border Patrol kind of laid down the law, and they declared that the park was officially going to be closed. And so after that, there was no more ambiguity. They said, okay, this is it. It's closed off now. And it may have been a response to these continuing problems that they were having with people, with their own agents, really not understanding, what the laws are, what's the jurisdiction in this area. And so after that, we began to commit civil disobedience. We continued to go to the park and use the park, and we had the same kind of response from Border Patrol. They would warn us and tell us, please don't go up to the fence, you are breaking the law. And we would go up to the fence, we would serve communion, we would have the same kind of engagement that we always did, and they wouldn't arrest us. And it became this kind of pressure that we put on them. We thought, you know what, if they're really going to make it illegal for people to have an innocent conversation, and illegal for people to have innocent fellowship at the border, where we're actually having a communion service at the border, then let's make them arrest us for doing it. And let's make them play their hand. And so we actually sort of set it up and tried to sort of see if they were going to follow through with that. And so the pressure came to a head in February of 2009, where we actually had a huge service on the border. It was a memorial service for one of a long-term activist and Madre Patricia, who passed away, who was a tireless worker for immigrants' rights in San Diego. And we had a choir there that performed for a requiem. And we got there, we had about 150 people. We got there and we were met by this phalanx of Border Patrol agents that were dressed in riot gear, and they had pepper spray guns, and many of them were driving around in these four-wheel vehicles and kind of like literally chasing us around like we were sheep and kind of trying to herd us. And it was the first time we'd really been met with this kind of like overt force and a real militarized force, and it was shocking. And that really signaled a kind of turn in the tide for us. And it was a real watershed moment where what had been a kind of cat and mouse game in 2008, we'd been chatting with Border Patrol and talking to them and not really overtly hostile. It really became hostile. And it was hostile for quite a long time during 2009. And that whole year of 2009 was very, very ugly. We continued to go down to the beach, but we couldn't approach the fence. And every time we went down to the beach, we were met by a wall of agents. And we went down there several times and just had guitars, and we were sitting on the beach playing guitar, and we'd be surrounded by 14 Border Patrol agents standing there, and we'd sit and play guitar and sing and laugh and talk for 2-3 hours, and they would just stand there. And it was kind of creepy. It was very weird. And so that was our experience with the Border Patrol until we started actually having these meetings, having these face-to-face meetings with them. Gosh, I could go on and on. I don't want to...
Well, yeah. I kind of want to leave people hanging a little bit, not the whole story, but you've got enough of the story at this point that we do have some time left for questions that you might have, and some of your own. This has likely raised some maybe serious issues and questions in your mind. Anybody want to venture a first question? Maybe a question for clarification, or maybe you want to disagree with some things. That's okay too.
My question would just be how you would encourage students at Point Loma or college students in general to get involved with this issue.
this is not a plant, by the way. Anybody would say that?
Oh, wow. That's such a good question.
Professor?
Okay, I'm a professor. So I have to answer this question. Wow, that's a great question. What's happening right now it is very interesting, and I've thought about this a lot in terms of when a kind of public engagement turns into very close meetings with Border Patrol. Where this has gone is a group of us have been meeting regularly with the Border Patrol discussing Jim's design. And so it's been more of, to me, it's been more of a sort of nuts and bolts concrete discussion among construction specialists about, what kind of construction materials are we going to use? What kind of wall materials are we going to use? How many feet is this going to be? And it just sort of reminds me of hanging out with my dad. My dad and mom built our house. And, reminds me of like hanging out at the Home Depot. It's turned into that kind of a conversation. And so I look back kind of fondly at those times in 2008 and 2009 when we had these great meetings at the border and we could hang out, and it was more of a public space and it was more that kind of engagement. And so, one of the things that people can do is to continue to go to the park. It seems like a very simple thing, but to continue to go and visit this park under these circumstances, it requires a bit of a commitment. It's very uncertain. It's kind of a creepy experience. But one of the problems we meet with the Border Patrol all the time is their perception that no one goes to this park anymore. And so, they keep telling us, well, nobody goes here anyway, so who cares? Nobody's ever going to go there. So why do you care what happens to this park? And so if that becomes a reality, then they've succeeded in taking over this park and militarizing this space and literally turning it into the war zone that they imagine that it is. And so one of the things people can do is go to the park, plan events. There are many events that Dan Watman sponsors on the border. His group is called Border Encuentro, and he has events once a month where he gets people together on both sides of the border. And they're really fun. He does really fun stuff. He's done, for over a year now, he's done this one event that's called Signing Across the Border. And they have people that do American Sign Language on both sides of the border. And they used to go right up to the border fence and do it. And now they actually use binoculars, and they stand far away from each other. And they literally use binoculars to read the signs and translate to people on both sides of the border, and they communicate. Yeah, you can see how far. And so those are some events that you can participate in. There's also this wonderful organization called Wild Coast Costa Salvaje, and it's a binational environmental organization, and they also sponsor beach cleanups and all kinds of really, really cool activities in this area as well. So those are two organizations that that you can get involved with that'll take you down to this area. You'll learn about this area. You'll learn about the estuary and get more connected to the space itself. And of course, Friends of Friendship Park. We're a coalition, so we've got more information here if you're interested. More of the history of our organization. We're a coalition of different organizations. And so, there are lots and lots of us, and we all are connected to different groups. So there are, many different ways in to this.
Jim, do you want to tell them about the actual campaign that they can sign on to and learn more about their website and whatnot?
I'm not too fast on the website itself.
Well, the what we're asking, the simple ask that you saw in the video, something very immediate that students can do, right?
We're seeking support from you all. You can go online, and it's super easy to click through a few buttons, view the proposal. You've already seen the proposal, but really the more people that we have that say they support the proposal, the more seriously the Border Patrol will take this, and the better chance we will have of completing our entire design. As a designer and also as users, as the Friends of Friendship Club users, it's going to be a really tough decision for us, and we're going to have to make it pretty soon on whether to reject some of Border Patrol's recent kind of approaches to us. They're coming to us, they're approaching us with some openness to accept maybe 70% of what we want. And we're going to have to make a decision pretty soon whether we reject that and push for all of it, with maybe getting 0, or we accept the partial victory. In fact, we're going to face that decision making this weekend because things are happening really quickly at the moment, and having fast and furious communications with the Border Patrol. But for the first time, after months and months and months and months, they've said yes on a few things out of the blue. Largely in part because we've put the hammer down, because we've really started to apply uncomfortable pressure on it. So.
Well, we want to end at 8:30, but are there other questions? We could talk about this particular campaign, but questions you have? Yes, I'm up.
Okay, well, I mean, this park is really interesting and stuff, but I feel like there's something a little bit deeper than just putting a park at the border. And I feel like we've kind of been dancing around that, and I think it's probably pretty important. So I just wondered if you guys wanted to comment on why should we put a park there? Why is it important that people can interact intimately down there? Why should we care about that?
It kind of goes back to what I was talking a little about earlier about sense of place. This park, the monument itself that it's built around, has essentially been there for over 150 years. And for 150 years, and actually well beyond that, when you think about the indigenous peoples of the area, there was free migration back and forth throughout this entire area. And I think the point that we really need to keep in mind is that what's happening now is something that's just taking place now. It's not something that even respects this tremendous history and the future history to come of this area. And so I think even though the park itself might be just a small gesture or something to recognize that history, it's important to remember that it is a continuum of not so much a physical place, but a spiritual place and a cultural place that people for generations have used this as a center to meet and to interact with one another. And so that's really the important piece about this. Now the park itself does have historical precedents, as it was talked about earlier. It was essentially dedicated by Pat Nixon back in 1971, and it does have that significance. And for the Border Patrol, Department of Homeland Security, the federal government, whoever you want to say, to just indiscriminately come in and say that that's not important is completely wrong. And so I think the local community has taken a stand and says that's not right. And we want to maintain it for what it is and what it should be and what it can be. And that's, I think, really the primary driver that we're looking at. Is this is a prime example of border regions around the world, and the fact that any border is it's artificial. It's not anything other than a line on a map, and unfortunately it can be a very divisive thing. And we take a stand in that. We don't think that that's true. I hope that answers your question.
I put this particular slide up because it helps me really think about this space theologically. And as we gathered as Christians on both sides, in real communion together an actual breaking of bread. I have a couple of pictures I can show you afterwards of little kids taking communion bread through the fence and sharing that together. It raises real questions about, identity and nation, identity of nations and the protection of one nation over against another, and how it divides the church, right? How it divides people of goodwill, or Christians in this case, from one another, right? And so, in some ways, saving Friendship Park, saving a more holy space, saving a space that's less militarized, is not like prison, and is a lot more like a park where families gather, is about shifting the imagination. It's about shifting the imagination to something other than grounded in sort of a protectionist nationalism that I think we're all in danger of, especially when we live in a border town. So I do think there's deep theological reasons to be involved in this kind of as well.
My third question, I just want to make the comment real short. I graduated, my wife and I graduated from Tijuana as 1974. But we left this place. We were looking for a place to raise our family. We were just getting started, and we ended up in Imperial Beach. And it's a mystical, magical place. You hear all this negative stuff about IB, the sewage, and all this great. It keeps people away at times. But it's, you can see the Tijuana Boulevard from my house. And my kid, my son, he graduated from here, was now a doctor in Scripps. And my daughter, who was a student of Dr. Jenny Gates here, spent time in Cusco. But we live this borderland culture there at the border, right there. And if you want to spend some really quality time with somebody special on Valentine's Day, take a walk along that stretch. It's mystical. It's magical. I mean, the Tijuana sloughs, the riverbed, Tijuana River mouth, if you like to surf, it's an incredible wave. It's a really cool place. It's just, IB is in the border region. There is no border. My surfer friends from Puerto Escondido would just walk across and come to my house before the fence was built. And all kinds of we take walks, my dog and I just go through the sloughs, go all the way down to the fence, come back. We do it almost weekly. And it's a really pristine, beautiful place. And you encounter all kinds of salty characters from, it's magical. Read the book Tijuana Straits, and you'll get an idea what's going on at the border. But IB is que bueno. Good place to live.
How's this sit with your question?
What would you be your response to people who would say that the border is there for our protection? People in the U.S. that maybe don't understand what's going on. What would be your response to that comment? Any of you guys?
You had kind of a beautiful response to that. Would you mind taking a stab at that?
Sure. Well, I mean, I tell you the truth, most of the time I've been working with Friendship Park, I've tried to not be political in the least, and I've just tried to design out of a place in my heart and in my soul. So some of these comments about, I don't know, when you're asking, do we need a fence or don't we need a fence? I'd rather sidestep that question if you don't mind. But I am quite certain that, and I hope we don't need the fence now or maybe in the future we don't need it, but the thing that we do have to do is protect the beliefs of the ordinary citizens of both the U.S. and Mexico. And I travel to Mexico quite a bit, and I know from the things that I hear that there's starting to be a lot of bad feelings just from the ordinary citizens of feelings of betrayal, for example. And if this goes on for a super long time, it's going to be really, really hard to get this feeling of just being neighbors, simple neighbors, back ever. Or it will take so long, so much effort. So while I still do think the average citizen of both countries don't have deep animosities. It's just being played out on this other level. But there's going to come a time, and it's not going to be that many more decades in the future, where if we don't solve the problem now, we're really going to have a problem. Because the best security is being friends with the one next to you. It's an obvious thing.
I can speak to it on a little more sort of socioeconomic, political level, and you could talk for days about this. But one of the things that we know just from watching unauthorized border crossing is that there are a few problems that we've identified. We've identified a lot of drugs coming into the United States from Mexico, and that's a shift that happened in the 1990s when the Colombian drug cartels started sending drugs through Mexico rather than sending them through Florida. And so we've had that increase since the 1990s. Drug cartels don't throw drugs over a fence. Drug cartels are billion-dollar industries. Drug cartels build their own tunnels under the wall. Drug cartels buy their own airplanes. So to imagine that a little 18-foot wall is going to have any impact on drug cartels is foolishness in the extreme. It has absolutely no impact on that whatsoever. The other problem is that we have a lot of guns and weapons that are being transported from the United States into Mexico. Likewise, these are billion-dollar industries. These are corporations that are making tons of money by buying and selling weapons. And so the border wall really does absolutely nothing to stop or prevent or even address in a rational way the actual problems that we're dealing with, the actual problems that the Department of Homeland Security and the Secretary of State have identified as the main problems. What the border wall succeeds in doing, however, is punishing the poor. It's the poor migrants who are forced to walk through the desert now, who've been pushed into these desert regions in eastern San Diego County and in Arizona, and who are walking through the desert at 125-degree temperatures in the middle of the summer. And hundreds of people are dying every year because they're pushed into those situations. And it's the poor, it's the most vulnerable, it's the most marginalized of society in both Mexico and the United States who are being put into this position. And that's really the consequence of the border wall. And that's really the impact of this border wall. It has no impact on the cartels. It has no impact on drug trafficking. But it has a tremendous impact on these most marginalized of our society. And so that's kind of where I'm coming from with that.
I would just want to add one thing, and that is it's kind of a loaded question, right? Because when you ask the question, what do you say to the people who say, this is there for our protection? The real question is, who is the our? Whose protection is it for, and against whom is it real protection, right? So if you conceive of yourself, when you say our, I mean, it is for me and all of my fellow citizens of the United States, that would be one way to frame it, right? But let's say you're having communion at the border, and part of your body is on the other side, and part of your body is on this side, right? Part of the body of Christ is on that side, and part of the body of Christ is on this side. Then, how can we say this is for our protection? Who is the our we're talking about then? Then we have to ask other questions like, how is that fence that's there affecting my part of the body that's over there? And how is this fence affecting the part of the body that's over here? It becomes a very different framing for asking the question. Who's the our we're talking about here?
I wanted to respond to the question about a couple of questions you as a part of Friends of Friendship Park and as a Point Loma grad. Somebody asked, why should we care about this park? What's the point? It's just one park or whatever. Two reasons. One is really practical. What is special about this park? This is one of the few places, if not the only place along the border, where people can meet like this. For a lot of people who are in this country and who are getting their papers together or who have a certain kind of visa, they can't go to Mexico. And so I've met dozens of people who go to this park or used to go to this park because that's the only place that they can meet with family of theirs who's on the Mexican side of the border. And there's lots of people who are not citizens or legal permanent residents, but are here, they're here legally, they have visas and everything, but they cannot cross to Mexico. And that place has been destroyed up until now. But that was the only place where that could happen, where they could see their mother, their grandma, their kids, their lover, whoever. Beyond that, though, I think it's an issue of conscience, an issue of faith, why we should care about this park, because events like the communion services can happen here. And yeah, it's symbolic. It's not practical like the first reason, but I think it's also real and it's very important. Because when you have a communion service where two people in two countries are coming together and sharing communion, you are showing what the church is about. And that's a point where each of us has to face this really deep crisis of conscience and ask ourselves, what is the church to me? Is it the American church or is it the worldwide church? Who is my father? Is my father God, the same father the people on the other side of the border, or is my father Uncle Sam? Who do I pledge allegiance to? And that's what we all have to ask ourselves.
I will have to let that be one of the final words here. We'll be around for a little bit for questions afterwards. There's some paperwork here that Jill's going to put out back to give you some more detail and give you some of the emails of the Friends of Friendship Park, friendshippark.org. If you want to learn a little bit more, you want to see pictures, the history, old pictures of what it used to look like, friendshippark.org. And feel free to come up and talk with us afterwards. Thank you so much for your patience tonight and for your interest in being here. Special thank you, please. Special again for our guests tonight. Blessings and unity.